Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the British Royal Armouries taking a look at a light machine gun that I've wanted to cover for a very long time. This is a Steyr-Solothurn S2-200, and you perhaps can't see it from there, but this has a side-mounted, curved 25-round magazine, which I may or may not be able to get back into the gun. Anyway, this is a gun that was actually designed by Rheinmetall, and it's worth going into a little bit of the background of where Rheinmetall came from. They were first founded in 1889 as the Rheinische Metallwaren- und Maschinenfabrik in Germany. In 1907, they bought the Dreiße factory in Sommerda, and they would use it for all of their machine gun development, and they would actually continue to use the Dreiße brand name for some of the stuff that they were making. So there's a lot of overlap between Rheinmetall and Dreiße in terms of production, especially when we start talking machine guns after World War I, because the Treaty of Versailles is going to prohibit a lot of German arms development, but didn't actually prevent it from happening, it just forced it under the table. So Rheinmetall wanted to continue developing small arms, military small arms, especially machine guns. Naturally, they did so, and what they did was develop a couple of collaborative partnerships, really. So in 1929, Rheinmetall purchased a 90% stake in the Swiss company Solothurn AG, and that would become essentially their cover, their assembly plant for guns. They also maintained a close relationship with Steyr in Austria. So these guns, for example, were manufactured by Steyr and then assembled by Solothurn in Switzerland when they were initially presented, because this was still during a period when Rheinmetall couldn't be openly doing this in Germany. A good example of what they did do in Germany were, for example, the Dreiße M13, or MG13, which is in fact not really Dreiße, it's a Rheinmetall gun, and the name makes you think it's a 1913 design, just like the MG14 was 1914, the MG15, like the 08 was 1908, the 08-15 was 1915. The MG13 was an interwar gun with a name to make it sound like it was a pre-war development. We're definitely not making new machine guns. We already had that. Anyway, this is developed by Louis Stange, who's a fantastic small arms designer in Germany. He would go on to also develop he developed the FG42. We'll just leave it at that. That's enough of a credential for him. This would also sort of be the basis for the development of the MG34. This was very similar to the MG15 aircraft guns that work on the same sort of form factor. And the idea here was to develop a machine gun that would be primarily manufactured on a lathe, or a lot of lathes, instead of on a mill, because that was seen as a more efficient, more economical manufacturing technique. So we have a lot of round parts, and really we have a very slim, compact form factor for this gun. It's really, I think it's elegant looking and very handy. Now, the gun was first presented in 1928, 1929 to the German military. And they were not interested because they already had the Dreiße MG13 in service. At that point, by the way, the gun was offered in either 7mm Mauser or 8mm Mauser. With German military approval not coming, the company decides to offer it for military export. And they actually make a sale in 7mm Mauser to El Salvador, of all places. They sell 47 of these to El Salvador in 7 Mauser. And that 7 Mauser gun would have also used MG13 mags. The same magazine worked in 7 and 8mm Mauser. 47 guns to El Salvador, of course, is not really going to sustain factory production. It's not really what they were looking for. They keep going, and they managed to also successfully market the gun to both Austria and Hungary. Austria will adopt it as the MG30 in 1930. Hungary will adopt it as the 31M in 1931. Both of those countries using the 8x56 rimmed cartridge, the same cartridge you may recognize from the M95 straight pulls. And that is why it has a curved magazine, because it was a rimmed cartridge with a rather small bullet and a rather large base. Requires a curved magazine to run reliably. So there are two versions of this gun out there. This is the Hungarian one. It is immediately distinctive because it has this rotating carry handle, and this, by the way, is the correct orientation. It goes forward. Usable as a carry handle. I don't know how usable this would be as a stabilizing handle when you're shooting. Obviously, the stock is designed to pull your support hand in underneath and hook in right there. Someday, perhaps, I'll get to shoot one of these, and we can see what that carry handle actually does, if anything. But the Austrian version does not have this handle, and there are a couple other slight differences. But before we get into those, let's take this apart and let me show you how this is essentially a very refined German Hotchkiss portable. All right, I've switched to the Austrian gun at this point. We have our M30 here, and we're going to do three things now. First, I'll give you a rundown of externally how the gun is run. Then we'll look at a comparison of features between the Austrian and the Hungarian guns, and then we will take this one apart so you can see the internal mechanism. Right off the bat, of course, we have the side-loading magazine. We've got a little magazine catch right here. Push that in. It's a nose-in, rock-back magazine. Runs very smoothly in the gun. Just like that. In operational service, you would usually have an assistant gunner who would be doing the reloading for you. Also worth pointing out that these magazines were all tinned, so they have this silver appearance, less some corrosion, but that's normal. That's not in the white. That was a tinned finish for, I'm not really sure what reason. We do also have a magazine cover. So if you don't have a magazine in the gun, you can, maybe, there we go. You can lock that in place. The safety selector is this ring around the back of the receiver. Right now, you can see we have this set in the fire position, F. If I push down this latch and then just rotate that selector, I can move it to the safe position. This is full auto only. There's no semi-auto selector available on these guns. So I'll put this back in the fire position right there. The trigger looks very much like an MG34 trigger with two finger options here. E is for Einzelfeuer, or single shot on the top. S is for Sicher, something like that. It's full auto fire on the bottom. And the difference essentially is that you can only pull the trigger back this far on the top button. When you depress this, you can pull it back farther. Notice how much of the E is covered there compared to there. So it's not a huge amount of travel, but that's the difference between firing once and firing in full auto. We have a charging handle here on the side. This is non-reciprocating, so this can be shot left or right-handed, although obviously it's intended to be shot right-handed. The sight's slightly offset to the right. This fires from an open bolt, so I'm going to pull the bolt handle back, charge it, push the bolt handle to the forward position. And then, interesting feature here, I've got the bolt locked open on an empty magazine. The gun will not fire. It actually has a bolt hold open, or a disconnect, I suppose, in the trigger, so that once the magazine runs dry, you can't drop the bolt. You'll try to fire, nothing will happen. When you take the mag out and presumably replace it with a loaded mag, or the gun doesn't know the difference, or if you just have no mag in it, then you can actually fire. So the purpose there is to prevent you from constantly dropping the bolt when the mag's empty and then having to recock the gun to be able to continue firing. Front sight is almost French styled with a nice big post that has a little notch right in the center. That notch is your precision sight. If you want gross field of fire, use the big blocky notch that you can acquire quickly. If you want to try and make a precise shot, you use that little center cut in it. That's paired up with a very Mauser style rear tangent sight, goes out to 1900 meters, and it has a simple V-notch opening at the back. V-notch with a square post is a little bit of an unusual combination, but whatever. Now, the bipods on these guns have one leg here with a screw tightener and a leg extension. There is, however, a slight difference between the bipods, so that makes this a perfect time to transition to showing you the differences between the Austrian and Hungarian guns. The Austrians have this just simple spring retainer to hold the bipod legs together, like so. Also, the Austrian guns have the bipod, essentially the bipod mount, as an integral part of the receiver, the tube, the barrel shroud there. The Hungarians have the same sort of bipod, but they have these spring clips built into the bipod mount that just snap in place and retain the bipod legs like that. Also, the Hungarian bipod does have a little bit of pivot to it. The Hungarian front sight does not have that precision notch. The Hungarians have this rotary carry handle on the gun, which is really quite distinctive. Fold it down to keep it out of the way when you're shooting. Carry it using the gun, using the handle in the upward position, I suppose. The firing selector markings are the same, S and E, but we have T and Z for the safety selector markings. We also have, instead of MG30 or 30S, we have 31M, Hungarian Army, serial number 11,000 and change, 1941 production date. Disassembly is actually really conveniently simple. Before we go in though, let me point out this. That is actually the firing sear. So this kind of has shades of Nambu Type 14 to it, where you can fire the gun by pushing back on that little sear. Bang, like that. When you pull the trigger, you're actually pulling this little bar backwards to hit the sear there. Now, I'm not sure why Rheinmetall wasn't able to come up with a better solution for this, some sort of shroud over it. The reason that there's an issue at all is because this comes off when we disassemble it. So what we're going to do is first cock the gun, and we're actually going to leave the charging handle in the rearward position. Then you push down this button, same one you would use to manipulate the safety, and you rotate. There we go. The back end, the buttstock and everything, about a little over 45 degrees, and we can pull it out. Now, that's the bolt. The recoil spring is compressed inside here, so be a little careful with this because you do have a potential projectile weapon there. We can take the front end of our gun, and now we can pull out the barrel extension and locking collar right there. And that's pretty much it for this. This is just a big long tube with a shroud on it. The fire control group is actually remarkably simple. It is basically just a rearward pull. When you push this down, it allows it to go a little bit farther. So this looks like the MG34 on the outside. The MG34 trigger on the inside is far more complicated than this. All right, now I can take the charging handle off by just lifting it up like that. This is simple. It just has a lug here that hits the bolt and pulls it back. To remove the bolt, I'm going to use that exposed sear. But again, I have a recoil spring under tension here, so I want to be pretty careful with it. There we go. Let that out gently. So, striker and very long firing pin. We can actually pull the firing pin out there. So still a very long firing pin in a very long firing pin extension. This, by the way, is going to cam the firing pin. Well, the whole thing's hooked together. This cams backward when the bolt comes out of battery to make sure that the firing pin doesn't protrude and doesn't cause an out of battery detonation. That is our bolt. Those are the locking lugs. Recoil spring. And then this is basically just a hollow buttstock shell. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and take the barrel off. There's a little spring-loaded catch here. I push that in, and the barrel is has some 3 sets of interrupted threads. So I can pull the barrel off. That's nice, and it's not quite quick detach in the way of like change it out in the middle of a firefight, but it's also very easily swapped by armorers or for any other reason. Now, let's see, I'm going to leave this in place for a moment. If we look inside this locking collar, we see lugs that match the bolt. So the way this works is the bolt is going to travel. The bolt travels forward and back like this, and it looks like it has this looks like it should be a rotating bolt. In reality, the bolt stays in place and this collar rotates. So there we go. That is locked. When this rotates, it's going to accelerate the bolt backwards and then unlock it. So again, that's locked, that's unlocked. This is a recoil operated gun. So when you fire, this whole assembly, which has the barrel connected to it, is going to slide backwards inside the receiver. These 2 rollers are running in tracks in the receiver. Those tracks rotate, which force this collar to rotate. When the collar rotates, the locking lugs inside disconnect from the lugs on the bolt, like that. This will then hit the end of its travel, the barrel and barrel extension stop, and the bolt continues to cycle backward. It's going to eject a case out that side and then feed a new cartridge in from this side. Now that you see that, I can actually depress this little stop here, and I can take the locking ring off as well. So this is actually extremely similar to how the Hotchkiss Portable works. The only difference being the Hotchkiss is gas operated, where the Solothurn or Rheinmetall is recoil operated. So kind of cool. There, you can see those locking lugs right in there. And this guy just slides on and locks in place. This then serves just as the barrel extension. So the feed and ejection will take place through here. We have our ejector. The extractor, of course, is right there in the bolt face. Hopefully, I've been able to lighten this up in post-processing. Otherwise, it'll be pretty dark. But you can see the track for those, the rollers on that locking ring right there. And there you are. There is a Solothurn S2-200, in this case, specifically an Austrian MG30, fully field stripped. Really a very slick gun. Expensive to manufacture, although not as expensive as perhaps it could be, but a gun that would really kind of set the stage for a lot of the later German machine gun development in the MG34. This was, in many ways, one of the first general purpose machine guns. This was set up with this was available with a recoiling mount, something that would, like the forebear of the German Lafette mount, that would very much allow the MG34 to serve in a precision long-range heavy machine gun role, as well as the short, the infantry assault sort of light machine gun offensive role. Now there would later be an S2-300, which is essentially the same gun configured for belt feed. That was not adopted by anyone, but again, it is a step in the direction of the universal GPMG. So that'll be a subject for a separate video. I don't have any good numbers on total production of these, either for Austria or for Hungary. The Hungarian one here is in the 11,000 serial number range. You know, they did make a substantial number of them. There seems to be a very low survival rate. These are really quite scarce guns today. Now, for Austrian service, after the Anschluss in 1938, the Austrian guns, like much of the rest of the Austrian military structure, was absorbed into the Wehrmacht. Apparently, the MG30s, Steyr S2-200s, that was the commercial name for it, they were used primarily by Gebirgsjäger, or mountain troops in the Wehrmacht. So perhaps that's why you don't see them as much, kind of a limited scope of use. At any rate, I think they're extremely cool. They have a very significant place in the developmental history of German and German-speaking machine guns during the interwar years, and it was really cool for the British Royal Armouries to give me access to these two, the Austrian and the Hungarian, to show to you guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.